All right, Eric, we're finally doing it. We're
I
doing the
know.
podcast together.
I feel like it should have been number one, but
I know,
this
right?
works. Why not?
We've almost died together in Costa Rica. You flew off a mountain.
I did.
We've done lots of travel together. Cleveland, heroin needles in Albuquerque.
Not ours.
Not ours.
Not
We
ours.
found them. Dallas, El Paso.
Yeah.
Literally traveled the United States together, the world now.
Yeah.
And your podcast has taken off. It's going amazing and spreading awareness about church abuse.
Yeah.
And I wanted to start off with that because we all know my podcast is about real estate, about success, but I'm really interested in yours. And I want to start off with a story. So I have a very good friend whose sister was raped as a 12-year-old by her Mormon bishop. He was never charged. And she never recovered. The family never recovered. She ended up committing suicide a couple years ago.
Oh, wow.
Really, really sad story. And so, there's good people in every church. There's bad people in every church. It's just, it's everywhere, right? So we're not against any specific church. We're against abuse.
Yeah.
And the covering up of abuse. And that's what your podcast is about, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's something that's interesting because when I started the show, my only context was my childhood and my church and my denomination. It's like anybody, what you know is what you know. So the Mormon church, I knew the Baptist church. And doing the show, I started reading books from people who grew up Mormon or grew up Seventh-day Adventist or grew up in all these denominations where they were in a super abusive church. And I started going yeah, we wore different clothes and we sang slightly different songs, or maybe we sang the same songs, but then there was all these things that were exactly the same. And it was 98% of the abusive fundamentalist cult stuff is the same in all these different churches. And so we've even talked about stuff where it's yep, that sounds like mine.
Yeah.
But there's minute differences.
I just think it's everywhere. It's everywhere in the world,
Yeah.
period. It's not a religion thing. It's not a race thing. It's literally everywhere. And what is terrible is for the victim. I actually have a very good friend who also was molested by her Baptist minister. And then she was shamed for it and basically run out of town. And nothing happened to him. Nothing happened to the Mormon bishop that raped my friend's little sister. So it just blows my mind that people would cover up for those people.
Yeah.
If it was one of my kids, I would stop at nothing to uncover that. And I would hope that my friends, family, neighbors would be on our side as well.
But that's what's crazy doing the show. Because I've dealt with people who I'm the first person they've told. I've dealt with people who have, I'm the last person they've told. And it's the last resort thing. And when I started the show, I thought, people don't believe this is an issue until it happens to someone close to them or to them. And what's terrifying is I know people where it's happened to someone close to them and it still doesn't change how they view the church it happened in, still doesn't change how they view the pastor. To them, the institution has become so much a part of their life where everyone's expendable. And that's the part I can't wrap my head around.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I have another story. My older brother was raped in fourth grade by his fourth grade teacher.
No.
And didn't go to prison.
No.
So it ruined my brother's life.
No.
Basically ruined my parents' lives for a while there. So it's absolutely insane that again, these people get away with it, and I don't really tell anyone that story. I haven't told that my brother, I still remember today that the day when my mom was screaming and just police were in the house all of a sudden. And, I was 5 years younger than him. So if he was in fourth grade, I was kindergarten age. And, and that teacher got tried and he got probation.
Yeah.
Probation for raping multiple boys in Orchard Elementary in North Salt Lake, Utah.
Yeah.
I ended up going that same classroom, same school where that teacher was. They let him go, but so it blows my mind that people get away with it. And just like you said, why aren't the children the most important? Why aren't these pedophiles, these rapists, these terrible, terrible people brought to justice? It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. Well, it's On the institution side, the answer is easy everywhere. Money. Like
Okay.
you mentioned the school district. So like I just did an interview with someone in Maryland, and the case ended up going to the Maryland Supreme Court. It's still sitting there. But the school district, basically, he had an opportunity through a legal avenue, totally proper channel, to be able to pursue a civil suit against his abuser in the school district.
Mm-hmm.
The school district went after him and basically are arguing his constitutional right to pursue a trial and a civil suit.
Wow.
Because it protects them. It's their school district.
Yeah.
And same with the institutions. The Mormon Church has a lot of money at stake.
Yeah.
They have a lot of reputation at stake.
Yeah.
And so the dollar signs are always a big piece. But I think
also just the reputation, just their core belief, and that's crazy.
The people in the pew, like Mormons have pews too, I guess, so it
Mm-hmm.
works. But the people in the pew, I think there's also the piece where it's like there's a lot of nostalgia of like, I was baptized here, I was married here, like this, like accepting that is not what you thought it was is a big thing to do.
Oh, absolutely. That, because then that speaks to yourself, it speaks to what you believe in.
Yeah.
And people have a really hard time separating those two things. There's a story that an article came out of the mission, president of the Missionary Training Center had raped a sister missionary.
No.
And the church said, well, we asked him about it, and he said he didn't do it.
Case solved. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, man. Like, I don't know. But yeah, I wanted to kind of raise some awareness, because I'm not against any church.
No.
Like, I think a lot of churches teach a lot of good things. I'm against people who don't stand up for what's right.
Yeah.
Don't stand up for kids. Don't stand up for people who are abused. One of my good high school friends, she was raped growing up, and no one stood up for her. And I didn't know about it until much later. So there's all these, just so many examples of just really, really sad stories, people that are not stood up for. And just my own personality, like, I always want to stand up for the little guy.
Mm-hmm.
I always want to teach my kids to do the right thing and stand up for each other and stand up for the little guy or the person that's being picked on. So, kind of on a lighter note, one thing that caught my attention a few years ago is you've actually had sermons taught about you that you are the devil, that you are this terrible, terrible person, which you are. I mean, you worship Satan,
not for
right?
the same reasons that they say. Yeah.
No, but like literally, you're just shedding light on people who are covering up sexual abuse, and they're moving parishes, they're being sent to different locations, and it's not something new.
Yeah. It's
literally not something new.
Right.
And people know about it. They just don't want you to talk about it. And you're evil for talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. It is bizarre. I mean, it's not surprising. And I knew going in that would be the case, because of the small amounts of experiences I'd had before starting the show showed me that's what the temperature was.
Mm-hmm.
But what's wild is that of all issues that we could agree on, it seems like this would be the thing where, and this is the thing. I watched a video the other day, and it was talking about leaving fundamentalist faith. And the person in the video was saying, essentially, there's no right way to do it. Like, if you try to leave by their rules, you'll never satisfy them. Yep. Like, it's always going to be, why'd you leave? It's always going to be trying to persuade you back. It's always going to be trying to make you doubt your decision. And I feel like that's the same way with doing my show. Like, I started the show identifying as a Christian, partly due to the show and partly due to a lot of other reasons. I don't identify as one now, but I realized the same thing. There's no right way for me to say, hey, there's an abuse problem in the church. Like, it doesn't matter if I'm coming at from a Christian side. And now, especially coming at from this side, like, one pastor said I was like maggots eating away at dead skin at the church. Like, yes, I was doing good things exposing it, but it was a shame on the pastors in the movement for not doing it, that now the maggots had to do it. That's how I describe it. And it's like on the one hand, I'm like, thanks for admitting that you guys aren't doing your job. On the other hand, like, it sounds like I'm doing something pretty positive.
Yeah.
Where is this association coming from?
Like you said, of all things that we can agree or disagree on,
That should be like number one.
I don't know anybody in my inner circle that would disagree with pedophiles should be in prison, prosecuted, and that should not be covered up, And one of my good friends who was on the podcast a few months ago, she said, I love the church. I love Jesus. I love what he taught. I just don't agree with what this religion is teaching in some ways, right?
Right.
And Jesus taught love the children. Like, are you kidding me?
It was like one of the top ones.
If you're Christian, like that's what you are supposed to believe. If you're Muslim, if you're all these other religions, you're supposed to, it's about peace and love and doing the right thing.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting that, again, whether it's religion or it's Christianity or it's some other religion or school district, these people choose something else rather than the right thing. They choose someone else to protect rather than the children or the victims. And again, just mind blowing. And I've been listening to your podcast, heard a lot of the stories, and I don't get it. So I don't know if you can shed any light on why you think they're covering this up more and more. They're trying so hard to cover it up, but what's the psychology behind that? What is the good in that?
I mean, I mentioned one of the biggest drivers, which is money. Like I interviewed Jordan Belfort's ex-wife on the podcast.
The Duchess.
Yeah, the Duchess of Bay Ridge. And it was a really interesting conversation. And she proposed the idea, and I've heard this many times before and since, that people are motivated by money, sex, or power. And so I see people defending those three things, like one of them. Because that's the thing that everything that I put out, I have people trying to rebut what I'm saying. And so people will say, well, this pastor doesn't make money. He does this part-time and he's, bivocational. Okay. So is it power or is it sex? Oh, he doesn't care about this. He's faith. Okay. Is it money? Like, it's always one of those three things, like all the time. I think that's like the leadership side when they're actively covering it up. It's protecting the building that they have, the ministry, rather than, I think the Christian perspective would be, let all this stuff burn to protect the kids.
Yeah.
I think for the people in the pew, it's more nuanced. I think most people, number one, are misinformed or not informed. Their information source is that leader. So they don't go, they will never listen to my podcast because they were told not to. But I think beyond that, like I said, it's the nostalgia. It's, well, I don't want to admit I wasted 20 years of my life here. I don't want to admit that, I was wrong about my place where I learned about salvation.
Yeah.
Like, it's those bigger things I think people are scared to let go of. I am somebody that grew up in it and saw the issues and pretty instantly was like, this is messed up. So it's hard for me to like empathize with some of those people, but I also was a teenager. I didn't raise kids in the church. Like, there's a lot of layers to that are interesting. And, I have empathy for people who really struggle to accept that something happened,
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that comes to mind is what a lot of ultra religious fanatics have an issue with is guilt. And it's really, really hard to be honest if you feel overwhelming guilt and shame. And I think that's the feeling that overpowers these people that are protecting, the people we're talking about. They feel these overwhelming guilt and shame. They don't want to feel that, so they deny it.
Yeah.
I would say that is in my experience, even simple things, people cannot handle the truth. They can't handle the guilt and shame that comes with admitting, oh yeah, that dude really, really evil, and he's part of our group.
Well,
what's wrong with admitting that and just saying we don't accept that though? But that's kind of human nature. I actually teach my kids, my 7-year-old, he sometimes cannot admit he was wrong because he feels so terrible about it. And my goal as a parent is say, buddy, it's okay.
Yeah.
You don't have to feel this guilty and don't have to feel this shame. That is not good. And by the way, for Christians and people who are very religious, that's not what God wants for you. It's really not. He taught love. And so that's what I'm trying to teach my kids, because guilt and shame really prevents a lot of people from being honest.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to teach my kids to be honest over feeling too guilty and shameful to admit that they did something wrong. And I really think that's one of the roots of these cover-ups is people don't want to feel the guilt and shame or embarrassment that goes along with saying, yeah, that dude is in my congregation and he raped that 12-year-old and she killed herself 5 years later.
One of the things you just reminded me of with what you were saying, I think it's exactly what you're getting at, is I heard a therapist say, anger is always a secondary emotion. And now every time I get angry, I think about that quote because it's true. Like anytime we get angry, it's never just, oh, we feel angry. Most times I've noticed when I get angry, ever since I've heard the quote, I'm embarrassed about something.
Yeah.
Like, you notice this with kids, you know, we notice it with ourselves, but I'll use kids as an example since I'm not one, so I get to deflect. But like when you catch your kid doing something, even if it's something wrong or they broke something and they scream and they run to their room.
Yeah.
They're not just angry. They're embarrassed that, oh, I broke this thing. Oh, I did this thing wrong. Oh, I messed this up. I colored on the wall. Like, it's embarrassment. And I think what you just hit is like, and it kind of connected those two dots in my mind is like, there's people in my comment section going crazy that I'm exposing the church. And I think a lot of it is repressed shame.
Yeah.
I think embarrassment that we didn't see it. And what I would say to those people, those angry people watching right now is like, I think the thing that people need to really understand is you were never going to notice it. Like the reason that we use the words predator is because they're predators.
Yeah.
Like that's like going into the jungle and being like, I didn't see that tiger or I didn't see that lion in the like they are designed evolutionarily to hide themselves.
Yeah.
And so like you shouldn't blame yourself for how good they are at being bad.
Yeah.
You know, like
good point.
You should learn from it.
Yeah.
But like, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And
if they were easy to spot, we would.
And if it's really impossible to feel love if you feel shame.
Yeah.
Like and if you feel embarrassment and if you feel anger, those are opposite feelings.
Yeah.
You literally cannot have them both in your heart at the same time. And one thing I had to learn about myself, just being honest with myself and who I was as a person, is accepting it. So yeah, that's one thing I learned about myself is I was taught and raised to have all of this shame and guilt, which caused embarrassment over everything every time I screwed up. And I remember like my basketball coach junior year, God bless this man. He would sit me down and be like, stop getting mad at yourself. Think positive. You're awesome. Who gives a fuck if you screwed up?
Yeah.
Go out there and play better. And he would get mad at me for getting mad at myself.
Yeah.
And that was so wise because you literally cannot correct yourself. You can't get better if you're sitting there feeling bad about yourself, if you're embarrassed. And that's what I try really hard to instill in my kids now is like, who cares if you screwed up?
Yeah.
Admit it.
Yeah.
And say you're going to be better. And that's what I had to learn about myself. Like I read the book, Shoe Dog. Everyone's got a darkness he talks about. You know, Michael Jordan loved to gamble. That was kind of his darkness about him. And a lot of people can't accept that. But if you can embrace what darkness you have about yourself and just be honest about it and then work on it instead of just suppressing it, like suppressed desires and feelings. And I mean, that's how people just snap, you know? And, anyways, I think honesty and love is just the opposite feeling of guilt and embarrassment. You can't have both.
No.
And that's what you see with these people that are obsessed with, there's nothing wrong with my church or my pastor. He couldn't have possibly done that because they can't accept it and they can't have love. So there's just angry people in denial and it's sad. It's messed up.
Well, and it's one of the things that I think about for myself. I wrote in my journal in 2020 when I started the show and was still a Christian and not in church, struggling to figure out what I thought about it. And I wrote in there, abuse is already, I forget exactly what I said, but I said abuse is already terrible. I said abuse in religious environments it hits even worse because it's violating your body and your soul, and it strips away all the things you thought were true about where you were. And like we kind of just wrote like, I miss sitting in the pew, I miss singing these hymns, I miss doing these things. I miss knowing, I miss feeling the false sense of security I felt in that environment. And, the thing is though, is like that love for your church or even more broadly, the people around you in your community, whether you still believe the same as them or not, that should fuel you to care about these issues. Like I started my show heartbroken that the church that I felt that nostalgia for was not the place I thought it was. And I think like that's the thing I would urge Christians or any denomination or religion to do is like, if you love this so much, why let the bad actors run it? Like, why not feel this righteous indignation? Like, let the anger be a secondary emotion to your love and your concern and your heartbreak in these cases. But instead, I think it gets self-centered. It's like, well, this hurts the thing I like. Yeah. So let's just brush it over. Yeah. Denial. And like, okay, like what did that solve? Yeah. Nothing. Yeah. It just made you feel
They internalize it and make it about themselves rather than about someone else's actions. And I have a good friend who decided not to be Mormon. His dad won't talk to him. And I'm like, I can't believe not talking to my son. And it's broken his heart this last year. And, it's not just Mormons. There's Catholics, there's Baptists that their family won't talk to them because they leave the church. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like, that is so sad. That's horrific. Luckily, I have a family that loves me and whether I go to church or not, and whether I believe the same thing as them or not. But again, I don't understand that concept in your brain. If you're a Christian and Jesus taught love everyone and treat everyone, the sinner, the prostitute, everyone the same, how are you not talking to your son? Like, are you kidding me? That's horrific. So he actually said, he went up to his family for Thanksgiving and his dad said like 2 words for him, said like 2 words with him, for like 3 or 4 days. And now they won't speak to his daughter because she's not going to church. The grandparents won't speak to their granddaughter because of how she's choosing to live her life. And, so, I did want to skip to another topic that was really interesting to me this last weekend. One thing I wanted to talk about as well is, what drives me nuts is when people they'll leave, I'm in Utah, they'll leave the Mormon church and they can't stop talking about it. And they can't stop talking crap about it and how terrible it is.
Gosh, crud about it.
Crud about it. And I'm like, dude, I don't want to talk about negative. I don't want to talk about anybody negatively. And so they're kind of doing the same thing. They're like complaining about all these people that don't accept them, but they want to talk crap about this religion that they're not a part of anymore. And I'm like, just go be happy. Again, you cannot be happy if you're talking crap about something else. If you're being negative, you're being hateful. And so, there's actually this couple this weekend that I was just like, guys, stop. Like, don't ask me about it. No. Don't tell me any more weird stories. No. Let's talk about something fun. Let's talk about something. I'm sure you get that a lot.
Yeah. I think it's because I have like 2 feelings on it. Like, I think it's healthy in controlled ways to talk about your experiences and to figure out what went wrong and to talk about areas that could be reformed, especially when you still know people or care about people and that. Like, I do a podcast about it. So like, obviously there's room to talk about it, but it is funny. I've noticed like, especially my immediate circle, like if we're sitting and gathering, like a lot of times people I think try to connect with me by talking about it. And for me, my simple thing is like, for the most part, my podcast is my avenue with which I address my religious trauma, whatever you want to call it. But then I've also built a life outside of it.
It's not what you need to do on a social setting day after day after day after day.
Like that's not the thing
your
that
identity.
Like, fuels me. Yeah. Like it used to be. And I think it's normal and even healthy in some ways that first year out to be like, for me, it was longer than a year, but like, it's going to be on your mind. It's, you spent more of your life in it than out of it. Like there's things to work through and process. True. But what I notice, it's the cliche of like breaking Amish or whatever. It's like people tend to leave and they get stuck in this rut of anything the church said I couldn't do, I'm going to go rush and do. Yeah. Anything the church doesn't want me to talk about, I'm going to talk about. And I think if you're living in reaction to the church constantly, they still control you.
Absolutely.
Are
That's
you
my
drinking
point.
because you like drinking or because you hope they see you drinking? Like,
Yeah.
that's the stuff that's really hard. And it is hard for a long time to figure out, like, who actually am I outside of the confines of this environment?
Yeah.
And, but some people, I've been out for 11 years now, like, of my childhood church, and then 8 years out of like everything.
Yeah.
And it's like, if that's 100% of my brain power all the time, like, I haven't grown as a person. Like,
Right.
like it needs to
Go find happiness.
Yeah, it needs to go into this realm where, like, I am in a place now I'm healthy enough to help people, but also I can help them without it destroying my parenting, my marriage, my personal mental health. Like, and I think some people just get stuck in that, like, well, fuck the church. And like, that's their whole identity forever.
Absolutely. I know there's a group of people that meet monthly. They've been out of the church for years.
Yeah.
They meet monthly to talk bad about the church. And I'm like, how is that fun? Like, that's exhausting.
That's honestly the hardest thing about doing the show is, like, there are times where I, like, have to brush up on, like, what was this thing we did? What was that? And, like, again, but, like, that's been one of the things is, like, I've had to develop my show with myself. So, like, I'm having conversations that are way different than the ones I had early on the show, but it's like, and I've had some people that get mad, like, talk about this thing that you used to always talk about. And I'm like, this show is very much for other people, but also it's a diary of my journey too. So, like, if I'm thinking about broader questions about politics or religion or this separated from my upbringing, like, I'm going to talk about those. Like, I can't just talk about, like, it drove me crazy in 7th grade when they told us that, like, I've worked through that.
Right.
So it's, like, always constantly this battle of, like, being relevant to people who are freshly out of it and giving them the content I wish I'd had, but also not constantly setting myself back and going, like, let me brush up on my IFB, history and make sure, like, I'm up to code with what they're saying now,
Well, I just saw Anima at the Sphere this last weekend.
That's a big no-no in Baptist church. They don't know who that is.
Okay. In the Sphere, this amazing musical, visual experience, spiritual, like I would say, with my girlfriend, Betty Jo, and some friends. And I want to take my kids. And one of the resounding thoughts I kept having is I just want to teach my kids that life is about love and good vibrations. Like, that can be religion, that can be multiple different religions, that can just be spirituality. But again, Jesus taught love, right? That was like the most resounding message that I got from this guy who just did this amazing, amazing production. It's this musical and visual experience. And I felt all this love. And I was like, man, like, I don't want my kids to be taught, hey, you can't do X, Y, and Z or you're going to hell. And this person's going to hell, so we need to treat them that way. And this person chose to do that, we got to treat them that way. I really don't think that's the true meaning of Christianity. I think the true meaning is love one another, love, 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 good vibrations, positivity. Again, if you're covering up pedophilia, you don't have good vibrations. Like, it's plain and simple. If you're covering up rape, if you're covering up these things. And so to your listeners and any of my listeners that listen to this, like, please help people or get help. Don't cover it up. Don't be ashamed to talk about it like many people are. And if someone is shaming you, go find someone else that won't. There's your podcast. I'm sure you have a huge community of people that would be happy to listen and support others. And that's really what life is about, is helping others and good vibrations. It's like love.
Yeah. It's funny. I was just listening to Rainn Wilson on, who played Dwight on The Office, but also now is, like, hugely influential in, like, the spiritual space and writes a lot about it. And he was on a podcast and he said that the biggest spiritual experience he's ever had was at a Radiohead concert. He's like, my face was melting. I was like, felt like I was so intense. It's funny. It was so similar. I was listening to that today. But the other thing that's interesting is, like, as someone who doesn't identify with the religion side, there's so many principles and values that I feel like are still with me. It's kind of funny. I told somebody, like, I feel like fundamentalism trained me to be like, stand up for what's right in the face of, and, like, but it didn't look the way that they expected that to look when they were teaching it. One of the biblical verses that I think about all the time and I'm going to just totally paraphrase it, but the editor can put a text over what it says. But there's a verse that talks about bringing in the kingdom of God to earth. And it's talking about like Satan's been defeated. He's been and now basically it says like all of the like the forces of darkness will be trampled underfoot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's such a cool visual of like the leader, if in Christian theology, the leader is defeated.
Mm-hmm.
But now our role as people is to trample over all the remaining evil.
Yeah.
And I think like, and there's other verses about light and darkness and like all these things. And I think that perspective is so cool. And I think like if we all did our part to trample out the evil in our respective, what's left? Like, a lot of really good stuff. And like, we can debate all the theology and like what that looks like and,
who's right, who's
right, who's wrong. But like, we've been doing that for thousands of years and we're nowhere closer to knowing,
Right,
like,
right.
That's going to keep happening long after we're gone.
Well, and if you keep focusing on who's right, who's wrong, you can't have love for the other people. You can't, get rid of these issues, And so I feel like I'm really tired of the people like, hey, you're wrong because of this.
Yeah.
Well, let's focus on, again, if we can agree on one subject here.
Yeah.
One subject is this is wrong, covering it up is wrong, abuse is wrong, and there's no place for it. Well, absolutely no place.
Jesus said that the greatest commandment is, love the Lord thy God with all your heart. And then he says that the other greatest commandment is to love others as yourself.
Yeah.
And like, he says all the commandments can be fit under that. And it's like, okay, well, that looks a lot different than American Christianity. That looks a lot different than just culture. Like,
it's a lot different than casting the first stone.
Well, and that's
and ostracizing people.
That's what's so wild is like, I don't know if Mormons use this verbiage. Maybe they did, but like we always were taught about being countercultural. Like the culture's going this way. Mm-hmm. We're going to be different than the culture.
Yeah.
What's wild to me is like when a Harvey Weinstein story drops, the church doesn't act countercultural in how they respond when it's a pastor that does the same thing.
Yeah.
When it comes to, how the culture treats women, the church historically has not been very countercultural. They're very patriarchal and subject women to a lot of really bad stuff. When it comes to race, the church has not historically been very countercultural, especially the Mormon church, from my understanding. Like, there's some pretty heavy stuff,
Go to Peru and see what they did. The Catholics did the Peruvians.
Yeah, and so it's like, if we're truly going to be countercultural, like we need to stand up for things that are like radically different than how every other group, school boards, like Hollywood handles those issues. Yeah. And but it seems like when you actually do that, it sends like the church culture against you. It sends everybody, makes everybody upset.
It's like a mob. It's like literally a mob.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what do you have coming up that you're excited about? Interviews coming up that we can promote for you. Name of your podcast is Preacher Boy Podcast. Just want to promote that for you for a sec.
I mean, I think the biggest thing people should check out, obviously, Preacher Boys, because I have a vested interest in people checking that out.
Yeah.
But I was in a documentary series. It's 4 parts on HBO called Let Us Pray, A Ministry of Scandals. I'm in it, but there's like a ton of people that are way cooler and have way more amazing stories than I do. And so if like people want to get a glimpse of like the independent fundamental Baptist world, and if you've grown up in any religious fundamentalism, it'll feel familiar.
One more time, what's the name?
Let Us Pray.
Let Us Pray on HBO.
Yeah, on HBO. Let Us Pray, A Ministry of Scandals. Let Us Pray is a horror movie, so
Let Us Pray, A Ministry of Scandals.
And 4-part series, like 45-minute episodes. It's worth checking out. I don't think I have any big interview. I mean, I have some past interviews, like ex-wife of the Wolf of Wall Street, Nadine Macaluso, who's now a psychotherapist, and she's got a lot of experience with narcissists.
Yeah. What would you say to victims? I mean, I know what I would say is keep looking for help and don't give up, right? Like there are people that are willing to help you.
Yeah.
My dad's a PhD, a psychologist, and find someone to talk to. And he talks a lot about people in abuse, and they feel lonely and they feel, and guess what? That's on purpose.
Yeah.
You are ostracized. You are pushed away and you are made to feel alone on purpose so that you shut up. So what would you say to victims?
I mean, first and foremost, practical thing, I would say, always get a second opinion when someone tells you nothing can be done about it. So like at a base level, don't talk to one police officer who tells you can't do anything. I just really quickly, I had a case out of Canada, and she went to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, reported her assault, and he said it was past the statute of limitations. A reporter in Canada contacted her and said, there is no statute of limitations on rape in Canada. That police officer was either misinformed or didn't want to take on your case.
Wow.
She ended up getting to meet with the chief of police in Canada, whatever they're called there.
Yeah.
And was able to actually start working on her case. So like,
wow,
you can't talk to one person, one lawyer, one that. So that's like practical.
Get a second opinion.
Get a second opinion.
Multiple opinions.
There's always something typically that can be done, even if it's just getting your story out. The thing I'd say on like the healing side, or like first of all, do what works for you. Like I'm no expert, but like I would say, if you feel like there's absolutely nobody who's gone through your situation, it's just not true. Like, and it's one of the saddest. My friend who's in Let Us Pray said this. She said, this is like the greatest club that nobody wants to be in. Mm-hmm. Like every time I do a podcast, there are 3 to 4 women usually, or 3 to 4 men, depending on who the guest is, that will reach out to that guest like the week it comes out and say, like, me too.
Yeah.
That happened to me. I'm not going to share it anywhere. I'm not ready to talk about it, but like, I just want you to know, like, it happened to me too.
Yeah.
And I think that is heartbreaking that there's that many people, but also I think I've talked to so many people that are like, you wouldn't understand. My story's so crazy. This happened. Like, nobody relates to it.
Yeah.
They do. They're out there. And even if you're like, I don't want to go to the New York Times and share my story, like, you can find 2 or 3 people to really, hear you. So
get a support group.
Yeah, get a support
group. There's a built-in, unfortunate, large
especially
community.
If you're leading fundamentalism, it feels like our world is the world and the church and this, like, there's other people, that'll talk to you.
Absolutely. No, I would say get help, get support. There's a ton of people. My brother, one of my good friends, another one of my good friends who her little sister, like there's so many people.
And isn't it wild? Like that's the people that have disclosed it.
Yes.
Like the thing I never really thought about was when people say 1 in 6 men, 1 in 4 women have been sexually assaulted. But like if people actually reported, like imagine what
crazy.
Those numbers would
be.
So
one of my friends, and we'll finish with this, but like one of my friends, it was her uncle.
Yeah.
And the family covered it up. They protected him and got him away from the law. And it's sad. So more awareness, more education. I feel like that's the one beautiful thing about podcast, YouTube.
Oh yeah.
Is people are getting educated. So I hope that's what this does. Yeah. This wasn't to bash any one church, to make anyone look bad. This is meant to educate people and help those who really have a need.
Yeah.
Because your life could easily be ruined if you don't get help for it.
Yeah. Well, I've talked to people who literally were growing up in the 60s, and they're like, we really didn't know who else was there. We really didn't have and so it's so cool. For as much as this generation's getting weird, the access and the community through social media is like huge, and podcast, like the fact that I have a nationally syndicated show, like with
that's awesome.
Nothing is cool,
That's
so
cool.
Anyway, but yeah,
awesome. Well, Eric, thanks so much for being on the podcast. Again, if you are leaving a church, if you've been sexually assaulted, you're not alone. That's, I think, the big overwhelming message. The other thing is, if that's not you, but you're angry, you're denying it, you're trying to cover it up, like you can't do that and have love for others.
No.
If you want to be a good person, again, that's the one thing I think we should all agree on.
Yeah.
It's not to be covered up. It's the right thing needs to be done, and love needs to be shown to the victims. And so anyways, thanks for being on the show.